Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Neil Silcox. I'm the Faculty Excellence Lead at the Maple League of Universities, and I am joining you today from Wolfville, which is in Shubenacadie, one of the 7 districts of unceded Mi'kma'ki. I'm new to this part of town. I'm quite new to this office too, you might see. And I'm really learning to love. I'm very grateful for this land. And we have people joining us from all across Turtle Island and beyond as well. So if you would like to share where you're joining from, please put that in the chat, and I'd love to know where everyone's from. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Juan Carlos López, instructor of biology at Acadia and recent winner of the Acadia Alumni Faculty Award for Excellence in Teaching. I'm so excited to have Juan Carlos. He's always a bright light whenever I get the opportunity to connect with him. So please join me in welcoming Juan Carlos López.
All right. So I just want to mention that Acadia University, where I am and where Neil is right now, sits on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. So today I wanted to talk to you about inclusiveness in STEM and beyond, right? And as part of these better sessions. But one of the emphasis when we're pitching ideas and talking about this was the idea of how long sometimes it takes to get this kind of actions and change, right? So that's why it's named Slowly but Surely, right? And one image that came to my mind when I was preparing for this, was that of a sloth. So there's nothing lazy about this animal, and what I see in this animal is lots of persistence, right? And to me, they are mighty. So that's why I wanted to go for that image. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to share with you, a little bit of how I got here. What's my academic background, and there will be a bit of personal background as well when I do that. I first want to describe a couple of examples of what in discussing with Neil, we said, oh, these are sweeping changes. These are big things I was able to do. So I'll describe just a couple of those, what I think were sweeping changes to my program. But also I wanted to talk to you and put more emphasis on the smaller incremental changes, right? And in both cases, I just want to emphasize that I've done this with purpose, right? That I intentionally have done these things, right? I want to, in closing, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've learned so far and why I keep at it, because I will keep at it. So remember my strong and mighty and persistent sloth when we go over this. So I did my undergraduate degree at Washington University in St. Louis, and I majored in biology, and I had an opportunity to do research and got involved in plant research. And I like to talk about this because there was something I really liked about plants, and it was the fact that they couldn't move. They had to make do with what they had in that place, right? And you can argue that they can move, if the seeds move and create a new plant and so on and so forth. But in general, I was always fascinated by how plants cope with their environment because they don't have the mobility that many animals have. Right? So that I did my undergrad, and then I went back to Venezuela. That's my country of origin. That's where I was born and raised. And I did my PhD at Universidad Central de Venezuela in Caracas, and I worked in savannas. And it was a wonderful experience to be back at home and do my graduate work in there. And I worked in soil microbiology. So I was still associated with plants, but I started looking more at the roots and what happened in the soil. And that was my area of work. I moved from, once I finished that PhD, I went to the National Institute of Agronomical Research in France, in Dijon, and I spent a year there. And then I moved to Penn State. I spent 3 years working again with soil microorganisms, you know, in the forest floor. And I want to, you know, and I'm telling you this so that you know that how many places I've been to before I actually got here. But when I was at Penn State, I was there for 3 years, but I was there a year at a time, meaning that, you know, I had a year contract, and that was my 3 years. And then after those 3 years, I moved for a 2-year contract that felt, you know, like a amazing 2 full years to the Holden Arboretum and Case Western Reserve University. And then after that, that's when I finally came to Canada. And I came to Canada as a permanent resident. And as I was looking for work, which was a very challenging time for academia, it was 2009, I got one semester, I think I was teaching course and a half for 1 semester at UNBC, Northern BC in Prince George, right? So I moved there. And that was when I was actually faced with having a university classroom that, well, I had developed one course for grad students, but this is a full university classroom with many students and all the challenges that came with that. And one of the things that I remember, because I come from a long line of teachers, you know, in my family, and I remember my mom, who's a Manhattan Beach High School teacher, telling me, "You have never been taught how to teach." And I'm like, "Yes, I know, but you know, this is the job. I'll do it. You know, I do have the knowledge. You know." So I consider myself very fortunate to have started at UNBC for a couple of very important. There are more reasons, but there are a couple of very important reasons that are relevant right now. One of them, they had a very strong center of teaching and learning and technology, and they provided lots of support for particularly for incoming faculty, right? They had all kind of workshops and support and a very nice network of colleagues that actually helped me learn, you know, and it was the basics, you know, from creating your outline, lining up your course outcome, you know, with your lessons and how you would prepare your lesson and connect that with the assessment and so on and so forth. So I spent 4 years at UNBC, again, 1 semester at a time, and then 1 year at a time, you know, in very small contracts. And there was another thing that I didn't know. And that was, they had a very excellent access resource center. And this center really helped us make accommodations for students who needed it, but also in my case, I learned a lot of why we needed those things and why we implemented them. And it opened a whole new world to me, you know, because I came from a very traditional, you know, if you would, you know, a very rigid and traditional education, and I did really well, right? So I was not aware of the importance of well, first, I was not aware that not everyone could function in this system. Second, you know, why it was important to do it, and I understand that working at UNBC and working with my colleagues in the Center of Teaching and Learning Technology and working with the people in Access Resource Center, that's what I consider that I did a lot of the learning of why I do the things the way I do right now. So after that, and I bring this picture, you know, for because I know people will be in different stages in their lives, and as a colleague mentioned, you know, I wanna be a university teacher when I grow up. I spent a year in Calgary. We moved after 4 years in Prince George of smaller contract. We moved to Calgary, and that was a year of unemployment. And I was trying to find a job in academia, and I said, well, you know, I remember that by the end of or when I arrived that year in Calgary, I said, it's been 10 years since I finished my PhD. I did all this training in research, you know, and I did all this teaching, and I learned all these things. You know, I've given it a decade. I'm done, but I wasn't done. I applied for a job at Acadia University, and I came on a year contract, and my family stayed in Calgary, and I came by myself to teach the introductory biology labs. That contract of 1 year, the position opened up, and I applied again, and I had to wait for the, you know, the process to go through, and then I got the continuous position that I hold now. So I want to give you that background because I think it's important for you to understand that it wasn't a straight line to get here, you know, and I think that informs the way I do things now. So when I came here, though, I met a student. She had, you know, I was teaching first year, and this one of the teaching assistants that work with me, you know, with a because I have many sections and I have an array of TAs and so on and so forth to teach this course. And Emma Whitley, she was a major in biology, and she was a TA, and she was interested in stress physiology, and more than stress physiology, which was a course, you know, that where she was learning these things here. She was interested in how we could help students deal with stress. What she proposed was one of the things we do here at Acadia is that we have a research topics course, right? So she took this as a course, and her job was to develop, with me as a mentor, to develop a lab on stress physiology, and also, we wanted to help students succeed, right? And we had a particular plan of how to do this. We started doing this in the summer, and we met with different campus services and so on and so forth, and we were able to implement the lab that same fall when she had started in the summer. And what she did is that she connected with her professor, our resident, my colleague Brian Wilson, our resident human physiologist, and with different services on campus, including the counseling center. And what she developed was a lab in which it was a combination. It was a lecture that Dr. Wilson goes and teaches in the lecture part of the course, and then a lab where we we stress students purposely in this lab. So we ask them to do an impromptu presentation. They don't know how to do. We measure their vitals when they start, and then we ask them to do a presentations, and we hook them up to a machine, and then you see what happens. Of course, I still get stressed when I do presentations, so that is a normal physiological response. But the idea of doing this, is showing them, well, it is a natural response, but when it is sustained, and then we talk about stress and what it means to the body and how it changes. But then we also talk about the different services on campus, right? And the counseling service comes and talks about mindfulness and things that we can do to help cope with the stress. But at the same time, we teach them about all the different services that they have on campus. And we bring this purposely before they have the second set of midterms. So if they are in a place where they need this help, we are feeding them the resource right when we think they may need it, right? And we've been doing this for years, and it was a big change. We actually took one lab out of the curriculum to include this, and it has been very successful, and it has led to other things that I'm not going to describe right now. But that was one big project that I did thanks to the work of Emma, right, and colleagues, There is another project that I want to, a project that is, of course, very close to my heart, that is about a student who came and took the lab, and there were a turn of events, that led into her developing a lab on traditional knowledge and plant ID. In this picture, you see Leah Crisser, the student I'm going to talk about, with her captain from the Acadia First Nation. And what she did is that she had to develop this lab, she had to go on teaching walks with her captain. And it took her a while to get the knowledge. And then she developed a lab where she talks about, the way that Mi'kmaq use these plants and what they know about the plants present. But she also talks about what traditional knowledge is, what it means to her, and so on and so forth. Her work with this lab and many other initiatives on campus led her to win last year the 3M National Fellowship Award. And it has taken her for us, for the program is wonderful because we started including this in our labs, and she comes as a guest. And so does her captain, every year now. And it's so fascinating what she's been able to do, with this work and other things she's been involved in campus. That we get to see her in CBC News almost every month or so. Now, of course, these are big changes, right? These are things that we were able to do. I was able to do with colleagues, students, and collaborators. With Leah's captain. We have had different people who have contributed to us being able to deliver this in our program, and that is very important to me. But of course, I have learned many things along this process. And one of the smaller changes, that you will think is small, but it's not quite so small. Is like once Leah started talking about traditional knowledge and including that in the lab, and we talked what traditional knowledge was, and even myself, one of the points that we were very interested in making is that traditional doesn't mean old and outdated, right? And because it's a perception that you often find, right? And what I have done, for instance, that I put in the category for smaller changes is now when we talk about the salt marsh ecosystems, we've been taking students to the salt marshes to do all kind of things, we start talking about the salt marsh and the environment and all that. And I just weave through the Gluescap stories, right? Because there are a couple of Gluescap stories that talk about the environment where we are in, and I think Graham is gonna sit in on our assistants will appreciate this, because now we talk about the legends of Gluescap, and we said, we this with the idea of traditional knowledge not necessarily being old and outdated, but meaning something, because it turns out that some of those stories, line up with the idea that the Mi'kmaq were here when we had macrofauna, and there is a story of how the Gluescap petted the big animals, until he made them smaller so that they would be able to live with the humans and respect. And, so there are many teachings, but one of the things that I can point out directly to the students is like, Mi'kmaq saw macrofauna, and we know this, and we have these stories to this day. There is also a very fascinating story where he talks that can be interpreted as, this is when they saw that the last part of in the Bay of Fundy, the Mines Passage actually opened up, and got filled with sea, and there is geological evidence for that. This is all captured in these Gluescap stories. So I started to talk about the content. I want to teach them about the salt marsh ecosystem, but also put them in the context of the place and the land we're in, right? So that was a small change, and that didn't come right away. That came with me learning from Leah and from her captain, and keeping my eyes open and continuing this with my program and my students. So there was another opportunity that opportunity I call another situation that came along, and this is when the coronavirus hit, and we were talking about in lecture, we're talking about the scientific literature, and there was a lot in the press on what in a peer-reviewed paper that has not been, or a paper that has not been peer-reviewed yet. We had, so we took that opportunity to talk to the students about what's peer-reviewed, why do we do it this way, And one of the things that came into mind is that, the idea of collaboration in science and open access, the importance of being able to access this information and what it means and what had meant up to this point for the development of vaccines. There was another twist to this story, because it turns out that the scientists that were behind developing the mRNA vaccine all belong to the top scientists, the main names on developing these vaccines, all belong to equity-seeking groups, and when you dig a little bit into their stories, you realize that they really had to fight, and fight may not be the strongest word I can use, but they really had to assert their place to be there, to be in the position where they could do this science, and this is where we were able to get the innovation of these vaccines, and the questions I posed to the students. So I started, talking about the scientists, and then I said, well, what would happen if they hadn't persevered? If if they hadn't continued, against their odds, because they honestly, if you read their stories, you will think that they did not belong in that place, yet there they were, and they were providing the world with their discoveries, And I tried to end this lesson when I talk about the scientists, and with the idea that equity, diversity, and inclusion are basic human rights, and that they lead to progress, right? So that was my pitch for the students. Where did I put this in my lecture? Well, we did it in lecture in class, when we talked about scientific publications and all that. And I also with the story of Rosalind Franklin and DNA structure. So for those of you in the area, you will probably recognize this name because she's the unsung hero of DNA, because her work was ignored until many years later, and she had a very sad story. And what I asked the students, is when think of this story I just told you about the development of the COVID vaccine, and how things would have been different for Rosalind Franklin, if she had had the space to work. So I stopped there, right? But you remember when I told you that, it keeps, things keep changing and evolving with time. I am sure that come 2023, which is the next time I'm doing this with my students, I'm going to be talking about who had access to this vaccine, And with this whole idea of collaboration and open access, we all know what has happened in the countries, and we all know that not every country has the privilege that we as Canadians have to have an 80% of the population vaccinated 1, 2, 3, 4 times, So I know this is a topic that I'm going to keep working on with my students. Not to bore you, I'm going to do one more. And I want you to think of this law a little bit when I go through this example. And there is, and this is almost traditional, one way in which we teach students about the scientific method and calculated a mean and standard deviation is, a simple experiment in class, where they can formulate a hypothesis and test it, quickly in class. One of these or traditional, if you would, experiments is to do a ruler drop test, which is a reaction time. So you have to catch the ruler, without knowing when they are releasing the ruler, and then how fast, how far it goes down is how fast you caught it, right? And the lab I used, I didn't come up with this lab. I used this lab, it's been used for many years. I used it, right? And the way that we asked the students to plot the data, notice the 2015 on my presentation, it was 2014 and 2015 I did this, it was to separate the data in male and female, right? And then they calculate the mean and standard deviation. At some point, of course, I realized, well, that whole idea of asking people to separate in male and female and asking them to self-identify, it's not probably, definitely I knew right away that, gender is not the word I want to use for this, because gender is a social construct. When we talk about this in biology, when we study organisms, we separate them by sex, and that's the word we use. So, because we're talking about humans, I try to find euphemisms for this idea, so I said, well, the physiological sex a sign of birth, and so on and so forth. And it took me actually quite a few iterations of recognizing that this is something where I could find some probably offend someone or make someone uncomfortable, and that's the last thing I want. I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable in my class, certainly. So well, there was an easy solution. Guess what? You just want 2 categories, So I started using visual versus auditory cues and running the same experiment and teaching the same thing, because what I want to teach is calculating that mean and standard deviation. So, but I use this example because it was something that took me many years and iterations to understand, well, why am I doing this, and go back to what I had learned, so what is my learning outcome? What do I want to teach them? Where do I want to go? And what can I do to get to that point, and that's, that was a very easy solution. 2018, right? I did not stop there. The one thing about that I learned, and this I learned going to a conference, and they were talking about reaction rates and these things, was that I don't know how many of you are familiar with Project Implicit. It's an implicit bias test, very popular, came out of Harvard. It does have some issues in the methodology, but the general idea is that you use a word association and you use a reaction test, which is clicking on the word, you know, that you associate with certain categories to see if you have a bias or not. And that is a very good example of, you know, using the reaction test for experimentation, and also a very good example of a very good place to open the conversation of implicit bias. So I said, well, you know, we already have the reaction time test, you know, in lab. We're doing this to teach this. I can also teach about implicit bias, you know, in class. And mind you, first year biology. So this is not necessarily on the core curriculum, but I do think it's important for students to be aware of this. So what I do is that I ask the students I tell them, you know, what is this test, what's implicit bias, you know, and I ask them to go and do it at home and answer a questionnaire after that is not personal. Just, you know, tell me what, you know, where did you see that this was a reaction rate, where is it, you know, and hope that they would start learning about implicit bias, and I leave it there. I thought that it would be nice, and you know, again, remember that law I was using as an example, you know, in 2020, I said, well, you know, I should do a debrief. I should tell the students, you know, why I do this, but I don't want to put them on the spot. I just want them to know about it. So as I also became more comfortable with what word do I want to use, exposing myself or making myself vulnerable. Let me put it that way, you know, making myself vulnerable. I said, well, why don't I share my results? I took the test for male with career and female family, you know, and that was, well, no, it was career, family, male, female. What was my association? Male with career, female with family. And was it like, no, it was a very strong association. So I actually showed the students these results, you know, and I said, well, you know, when I took the test myself, you know, this is what I got, you know, and I showed them that I'm actually not necessarily with a majority of the people. I'm, you know, with 24% of the people who took this test, only 24 are as high as I am in that association. And I shared with them that I actually, you know, as part of my service, I work with women in science and engineering on campus, you know, to help promote careers in sciences for women. I come from a line of, remember when I said I come from a line of teachers? Well, all my aunts are teachers. They all worked, they went to have careers in teaching and being the principals of the schools and so on and so forth. When I did my PhD in Venezuela, the Universidad Central de Venezuela, it's a huge university, thousands and thousands of students. The engineering program had more women graduating, and this is back in the 2000s, you know, than male, you know, so more women than men graduating. So, you know, I come, and many of my supervisors have been women, so yet I have this association. And I tell them about these things, you know, and why I think I see this association, but it took me a while to be able to discuss these things, you know, about myself, you know, with a class, because it took me a while to be comfortable, and it's okay if you're not, you know, but I just want to say that I didn't start here, right? So what I've learned, you know, and again, you know, I've learned many things, but for the sake of the presentation, I've learned that there is always room for improvement. You know, we can always make things better. I know that. I have learned that collaborating with my students and with my colleagues will greatly improve my practice, you know, because I throughout this and throughout giving you those examples, I will argue that I'm making things better, you know, for my course, you know. I've also learned that this change, if you want to call it, or these programs, or whatever word you want to choose to use there, takes willingness. You have to want to do it, and I do. It takes effort, because it takes effort in different forms. It takes effort in coordinating these projects, or doing these things, or or taking the time to learn yourself and recognize yourself that you need to learn, and it takes time, right? And this time piece is key, because it takes time over time, but it also takes time in the sense that and this is why I started on the progression of how I did all the postdocing, and then I moved and I got 1 year contract, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. If I didn't have a full-time position that went through the whole year, I would not have time to do many of the things I've been able to do, and for many reasons, but it is very important. It has been very important for me as a teacher, to have the time to do these things, to think about these things, to learn about these things, and to implement these things, and I can only do that if I'm given the space to do it. And I mean, given the space to do it is given a job that is continuous and is full-time, and I want to make that pitch, and I want to tell you about this, because I know that many of you are thinking about these things, and and said, well, I would love to do that, but this is not my only job, this is not the only hat I wear. So I just want you to be aware of the fact that I recognize that, yes, I've been able to do these things because I'm interested, because I'm motivated, but because I've had the position and the time to do it as well. Much like the research in soil microbiology, I recognize that the classroom is a very complex place, and it's very rich, and I should add to the point that when I think of soil, this is in my head. Okay, so that complexity, those many things, and by the way, they are moving and interacting, in ways we see and in ways we don't see, but that's I recognize that, much like what I have learned in my research, that is true about the classroom and how things operate and function in class and in pedagogy, So I'll go back to my image of the sloth, because there is no laziness in this animal. You have to be very they have to be strong, mighty, and darn persistent, to be able to have survived to these times, and if you think of the mother sloth, sometimes she has to do the same thing, carrying the young, so I just want you to know that again, how I told my students that all the students, that equity, diversity, and inclusion are human rights and lead to progress. And I will continue to do this, because that's the side I want to be on. Okay, so I just want to walk through my outline again. So I told you a little bit about myself. I told you the changes I've made, that are bigger and require more time and more effort, and have been implemented, but also how some of those changes have led to smaller changes that I do. And my emphasis here is that I do this with purpose, right? So I purposely do this, and I engage in doing these things, because I think they are important, and I put effort into that. I told you what I've learned, and I wish I have also convinced you of why I'll keep at it, and and invite you to also do these things. So with that, I think I'm doing very well with time, aren't I? Here we go. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. That was wonderful. We're going to throw the floor open, and if you would like to ask a question or give a comment, you can raise your hand virtually. You can turn your camera on and put your hand up. You can type, if you'd like to type into the chat, I will read that out. I don't know if we have any first thoughts. Oh,
Sure,
Tony.
I'll have a first thought. It's interesting. So I know a little bit about the implicit test that you mentioned, and in and of itself has bias. So
Yes.
you start out and you go, uh-oh, bad problems right from the very first question. But nonetheless, it's really interesting, I think. But I also just want to, this is just, thank you very much, by the way. It looks like you're doing some really interesting and fun things. I think it's both. There are some folks like Anne Foster Sterling, who's a feminist biologist, who also argue that sex is also a social construct. And people like Thomas LaCure who basically have argued the same. So it's interesting, right? Like how we understand these things and how they can vary and change and be modified over time. So yeah, I just think it's really interesting what you're doing. And as someone who originally came from a science background, it was really interesting to see what you're doing. I think I really do think it's fantastic. I really do. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Tony. It means a lot coming from you as well.
Yeah, thank you. I've got Graham in the chat who said, congratulations, Juan Carlos. I was told many years ago that the best teachers are those who learn more from each class than their students. And that's really telling, something I saw in your story as well, that you go in looking for what you have to learn. I guess my big question is, I wonder if you have an idea of what is the next thing that you're interested in pulling apart or changing in your practice? Is there anything that is some low-hanging fruit for you, or are you sort of in a period of reflection?
That is a good question. I don't have a direct answer. So the answer will be, I don't have anything in particular, but and I talked about the things that were related to inclusiveness, but one of the things, I don't think there is a single year that I don't change something about the way I'm delivering the lab, and
right.
the way we're delivering exercises, and this is to the point of the importance of having time and having full-time jobs and being able to be present, when I make these changes, I usually bounce it by other faculty and other of my colleagues, right? And it can be something simple like, this year because we had a shortened semester. We started online, when we were expecting to be in person. Then we had strike, and then we had to come back and we had to pile things up. So we have to make changes. And I remember running on the hallway, the first week the students were back, and one of my colleagues comes, he's like, I know what I'm doing in lab, to assess this, instead of doing it in the exam that I'm not having, I'm gonna do it every lab, and I just go and check with them, to make sure that they have learned. So it's, and it was a very fascinating idea, but you could see the spark, and that led me to, I like that. I think I'll do that next year, where I'll assess the skills more easily in lab, and it's something that, again, it's a lab I've been doing for many years now, but I am always open to making changes because I know it can be better. I am convinced that it can always be better.
I love that, and I think that's one of the keys is the humility to say I'm can be better, which can come with the pride of saying I'm pretty good. Like I'm pretty good and I can be better. Val Lucas mentioned in the chat about agreeing about how collaboration is such an important part, and what you talk about having the support of the other people within your faculty, or that is really valuable. And I'm a contingent teacher. I was talking with Juan Carlos today that this is the last day of my teaching contract at Acadia, and I don't know if I'll be teaching again in the fall here or anywhere else. And I have certainly seen that what has allowed me in my field, I teach theater, to continue to try new things and experiment, has really been support of the people with full-time positions. And came up, my chair here was very supportive of me trying new things with the course that I'm working on right now. And every time I've met someone in this department, they've been really terrific. So Yeah, I think that kind of collaboration is also really key, not just with students, but with peers. Do you have any advice for folks who in STEM or in other fields are looking for ways to improve inclusion in their classes?
My big thing is be open to learn, be open to understand that that you may not. There's a phrase we keep repeating at home, and it's like, you don't know what you don't know. You know, there might be things that you don't know about, you know, and
right.
One of the things that I have tried to do, particularly when helping students, helping students that need certain accommodation, you know, it's like not be judgmental. Say, you know, can I make this accommodation? Would this impact what I'm trying to teach? You know, and try to get past the part, you know, where, well, this is impossible. This can be done. You know, it's like, where am I trying to get to? You know, and then you know, learn, and in that way I confess I was extremely rigid because I came from a very rigid system. So I thought, well, you know, if you cannot take an exam in this certain amount of hours, you know, then you should not be doing science. That was where I came from.
Yeah.
I quickly learned that was not the case, but I saw it also. I was willing to see it unfold in front of my eyes. I remember a student who was an adult student when I was at UMBC. You know, he had many years of practice. He had been, he was older than me. He was already working, and he was improving, you know, his degree so that he could access other things. You know, in all honesty, he knew more. Well, he knew more about what I was supposed to be teaching him, which was the biogeoclimatic system in BC. Than I've never lived there. You know, I had the knowledge from being an ecologist, but I have never lived there. He had lived and used and been, you know, this system that I was trying to teach him. Yet he came to take an exam, and he could not. He performed so poorly, you know. And I remember talking to him. He said, "You know this." He had later, you know, he discovered he had some disabilities, and the accommodations were found. And I actually met him a couple of years later when he was able to figure that out and advance, you know. And for me, that experience in particular, and I've had many like this, you know, was very eye-opening, because I said the accommodation was so minimal.
Right.
To get him to where he needed to be to show his knowledge, and he had it. You know, it was actually disrespectful of me not to recognize that he had the knowledge, because I knew very well that he had it. You know, and those are the things where I think is important to have some empathy, but also, you know, to step back and realize, well, maybe there is something else. You know, can we do something about that, and be open to do those things about that.
Right. And, you know, you talk about the value of time, the importance of time, and even when you do have a full-time position, I mean, it's not like being a full-time faculty member is not a life of ease and luxury, you know, like there's always a lack of time. And sometimes when we are asked to make an accommodation, it can ignite a kind of panic response. That's often my case, because I'm like, well, I know how to do it this way. I don't know how to do it that way. We've got a thought from Catherine in the chat that I'll read, and then I see your hand. We'll go to you next, if that's all right. Catherine says, "This was really inspiring, Juan Carlos. I'm wondering if you have any reflections or advice on incorporating Indigenous knowledge and stories into your courses. It is great you have Indigenous students or elders who are collaborators in developing labs, as in your botany class, but I'm wondering about whether it's appropriate for me, e.g. a white settler, to attempt to teach or incorporate this kind of content."
That is something I debate with myself a lot, you know, and I remember as long as it comes from the heart and you understand. But of course, first voice is it's crucial. It's irreplaceable, right?
Right.
But there are ways of bringing those first voices into your class and your practice and your readings, right? So you don't have to feel like you are the one necessarily instruction, but by just allowing them to explore this, the students to explore this, pointing them in the right direction, be that a video or a book or then you are fulfilling that purpose. And I am always hesitant, and my student Leah would say, because I said, oh, I don't think I should be talking about this, because Leah has been contacted by media, but different, in different ways, and sometimes they contact me, right? Because I'm the person who worked with her. And I said, Leah, I don't belong in that conversation. And she will turn around and said, oh, I can't believe you are saying that, because you kept, that was my discourse, that I don't belong. Leah says, my discourse was I don't belong in university. And there you were saying, yes, of course you belong here. Yes, of course you can do, and then she finds herself giving me that same speech, it's like, yes, of course you belong. This is something that is important to you. So why not?
Right.
But yeah, first voice is very, very
important. Thank you. I love that. And thank you for such a thoughtful question, Catherine. Val, I see you put your hand down, but I wonder if that's because you've changed your mind about the question, or
no, I just put it down. So I wouldn't be sitting there with my hand up. I was actually going to do two things. I was going to address Catherine, because I really was intrigued by what she put in the chat. And also I would like to acknowledge Juan Carlos, because I feel like I'm really in this class because we developed a good relationship back when I was teaching elementary school in Prince George. And we're talking about STEM here, and I've always been a STEM teacher. And so we were friends just socially, but I had Juan come in and we did hands-on biology work with grade 4 kids at Lac des Bois, the French immersion school. And those kids still, Juan Carlos, remember. In fact, our children are now 17 years old, but the peers of my son remember those classes that were hands-on. And so I want to say that's really significant. And that actually links with what Catherine asked, because I too am a white settler, but I'm also very Indigenous conscious. And I think what we need to do is collaborate. So we need to say and be humble, and we need to say, I'm not Indigenous. Who in this class is? Anyone? Oh, okay. I'd like to do some hands-on learning. Anyone have a grandpa that can come along, or grandma or auntie, when we do our field trip? Because if you ask, you receive usually. And collaboration, I think, really, and humility. Acknowledge that I'm from Venezuela, I'm white or whatever, and then open the door for people to come in and do hands-on. Hands-on, I really believe, is the key, whether it's university or elementary school or whatever you're teaching. That's it.
Thank you, Val.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I agree that it's great to just ask and reach out. And I also, I teach theater, and I teach like acting in the classroom. And frequently I'm the only teacher, a white teacher with an all-white group of students, and guided by the work of Tanisha Tate, incredible educator out of Toronto, who really advocates for bringing people of color into every acting classroom. I bring in scripts by people of color, and I say, I think it's about that humility that you brought up, Juan Carlos, that I come in and say, I'm a white person. I'm going to get this probably wrong, and if so, I would love to hear about it. I'm open to hear about it, but it's more important that we bring these voices in, maybe imperfectly, than leave them aside out of a fear of doing it a little bit wrong. Thank you, Val, for such a wonderful question.
Good luck.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Juan Carlos, for such a beautiful and inspiring talk. Your students are so lucky to have you. And I hope that everyone has a great day.